I'm going to start out with that last slide from last time that provides another example of animal communication. And this is this example of starting or pronking, and we'll explain in this video, and then we'll discuss it for a moment.
Springbok are the most successful desert antelopes in Africa. With short, thin fur, they can easily offload heat by sweating. The white patterns on their coats help to reflect solar radiation. And they never need to drink. They can extract all the moisture they need from the most meager desert plants. But in southern Africa's deserts, there's a lurking challenge. Cheetahs shadow the springbok herds. They too evolved in the desert. Thinly furred and lightly built, everything about them is designed to deal with heat and speed. Cheetahs are sprinters, not made for a long-distance chase. So they must get close. But springbok have keen senses. True to their name, springbok can leap 2 meters high. It's jumping with a purpose. It signals a warning to the others and confuses attackers. After such a burst of activity, springbok need to cool down fast. Here in the Kalahari, temperatures can be unbearable, but large animals can at least find a shady haven under the broad canopies of camel thorn trees.
Okay, so this is an example of animal communication, right? And so what it's indicating here, I mean, that this starting movement, right? It's something that actually slows them down, right? So they don't do it if they spot the cheetah within like 40 meters, they won't do it. They'll just run, right? So there's something extra that this is doing, right? In addition to moving them away from the cheetah, and it seems to be something they do when they see the cheetah, but the cheetah is still a little bit farther away, where it's clear that if the cheetah were try to chase them, that the cheetah would not be able to catch one of them. So it's a sort of it seems to be a sign, and this is the argument I'm making, that it is a sign. It's not clear. I mean, the narrator here indicated that it's a warning to others and a way to confuse the cheetah, and it could be a warning to others. So it could be a sign to the others that there's a cheetah nearby, and they should move a little bit away as well. It's not clear that it would confuse the cheetah, right? But what I'm going to argue, that it's actually, and it has been argued elsewhere, that it's actually a sign to the cheetah as well. It's a sign to the cheetah, we see you, so don't bother running. And it's an effective sign because both the cheetah and the springbok, they have an interest in not running too much because it's so hot. They'll be wasting their energy and developing all this heat in this desert climate, in which one of the main goals is for them to conserve energy and not produce too much heat. So what I'm going to indicate, though, is that this is a kind of sign. It's a form of communication, but it is another form of an index, like the growling of the dog is an index of the bark that could come, of the bite that could come. And so that the starting is also an index, in the sense that the starting occurs as, I guess you could say, the common quality of the starting and the referent. The referent is, I suppose, the fact that the springbok have seen the cheetah, right? So it's an index of this sighting that the springbok are aware of the cheetah, and I don't really know much about the mechanism of this, but one can surmise that perhaps this starting movement is a kind of something that they do, in a sense, involuntarily, kind of like the growl, kind of like when people laugh, where it's something that you do involuntarily when you're in a certain state of excitation, right? So they're somewhat excited, but they're not totally scared, right? And then they'll do this starting, and it turns out to be this index, because it is a factual index of their state of excitation and this knowledge that they have that the cheetah is nearby. So we want to compare this then, as we move on, to other forms of language. And so purse is indicating to us different types of signs. So we had the likeness, we had the index, and we had the symbol. And clearly the symbol needs human language, right? And we've seen these examples of likeness and index that don't need human language. Animals can do this. The walking stick, the starting, the growling. Those are forms of communication that use signs as well, but don't need to make a reference to an interpretant. And so in determining the origin of language, we have this kind of a tool to say, well, human language does require interpretants in language, and are there examples of this type of use of interpretants elsewhere besides in human language, right? So we can think back again to Kanzi, for instance, and we're going to do that in a little bit, about whether Kanzi is somehow doing something beyond just an index like the springboks are doing, right? And we're going to look at this in terms of this text by Helen Keller, because she gives us sort of this example of a kind of signing that she makes before she creates human language. But first, let me introduce Keller for a moment. Let me get this going. Wait a minute. What do I do? There we go. All right. So Helen Keller, born 27th June 1880 in Alabama. She lost her vision and hearing at the age of 19 months. So she, at that point, she was beginning to develop a little bit language. She indicates in her account that she did use, or she had heard that later that she'd used this word wawa for water before she lost her sight and hearing. So after she loses her sight and hearing, she develops, but she doesn't have access to human language. She doesn't learn human language until Anne Sullivan, this teacher, comes to her in 1887, when she's just turning 7 years old. And Anne Sullivan teaches her language through this writing on her hand, right? Later on, she has a very illustrious career. She earns this bachelor's degree from Radcliffe College in 1904, which is part of, at the time connected with Harvard University, but the women's college. She was in fact the first deaf and blind person to earn a bachelor's degree anywhere. She published The Story of My Life in 1903. She went on to become active as an author, publishing 12 books, and as a political activist, advocating for people with disabilities, particularly the deaf, and for the working class. She became a socialist, and she dies 1968. All right? So in her account, she's giving us this example of how somebody learns human language in a kind of, I suppose, artificial way that's not the natural way that most children learn language. And so this provides us with a sort of example of the process of learning human language and the difference that it makes. So, as I said, the first step in this is that she indicates to us that she had some kind of language before learning English. So she says, soon I felt the need of some communication with others and began to make crude signs, right? So she's making this, one of the things about this text that's different from the other ones is that there's lots of evidence. It's hard to find claims and reasons because it's just lots of descriptions and anecdotes and things, and it's you know, to find the claim is really actually the difficult thing here, right? Whereas with Peirce it was actually the opposite, right? Lots of claims, not much evidence, right? Claims and reasons, you know, the evidence was sparse. But but I think you could count this as a claim, right? Because she's saying that this communication she had in the beginning was this sort of crude kind of communication that can't really be compared to human language. And so then she gives this evidence. A shake of the head meant no, and a nod yes. A pull meant come, and a push go. Was it bread that I wanted? Then I would imitate the acts of cutting the slices and buttering them. If I wanted my mother to make ice cream for dinner, I made the sign for working the freezer and shivered, indicating cold. Okay? So, you know, so the reason, you know, she says is that for her claim that this is sort of crude communication is that, you know, this is just sort of these gestures that she's using as signs, and she provides these examples. But what we want to think about is, how is she using these gestures? And is it the same way as the Springbok were using the Stotting as gestures, as an index for something that they were feeling? So if we look at the no and the yes, I mean, you know, the no and the yes, you know, when you nod your head, shake your head, it's not clear that that's an index, right? It seems to be, those seem to be kind of arbitrary signs, right? A pull meant come and a push go. That seems to be much more like an index, you know, pulling, and I mean that seems like you're actually doing what you want, you know, coming and going by pulling and pushing. That seems to be an indexical sign, right? That you could imagine, I suppose you could imagine your dog doing that, right? You know, kind of pushing you to make you go somewhere, right? Pulling you to make you come, right? So that seems to be a kind of thing that is comparable to this kind of indexical sign that we see with animal communication. Then we have this example of the imitating the act of cutting, slices, and buttering. This is not as clear, I suppose, but I guess you could say it's close to what, remember, Warburton called action as sign, right? So carrying out this action, and you know, she's sort of imitating that action in order to make this sign for bread. And perhaps, you know, this is maybe a little bit farther away. I guess it's not an exact index, right? Because she's actually taking that action out of the specific context in order to indicate a kind of a want, right? So this might be moving away. And then when we get to this third example of making ice cream or wanting ice cream, is she's working the freezer and then shivering, indicating cold. Now here, she's got actually two gestures that she's putting together. And that seems to be something really different, right, than what we've seen with the animals, because she's actually got a sense of predication. She's saying, okay, there's the freezer, and then she's adding this sort of shivering to mean cold, which seems to be actually adding this quality to it. And the way we know this is because if she were shivering, she's actually shivering, which typically is it would be an index that she's cold, right? And so, you know, kind of the shivering would be this index. So if she's just shivering because she's cold, that's you could take that as a kind of indexical sign that she's cold, right? Because you only shiver when you're cold. But she's actually not cold, right? So she's not cold and she's still shivering. So she's actually detached the shivering from the specific situation of being cold. So you recall that's what's necessary for making a sign into a predicate, right? Because the predicate is something that you can use in all these different situations where you can detach it from the substance. And then you can say, well, it could be cold, it could not be cold. And so if you can detach it from the substance, then all of a sudden you're using it as a predicate. And in fact, you're creating this proposition, and she's creating the proposition by linking it up with the motion of the freezer, of I guess working the freezer, and creating then, I guess, ice cream as a predication, right? As sort of freeze and or sort of this machine and cold to create what she wants to say, right? So she is actually then using this gesture not as something that's that's indexical, right? So it's not as if every time she's shivering you know she's cold, right? So that would be an index, right? Because there's a correspondence in fact between what she's doing and the referent of what she's doing, right? So the starting of the springbok is really only going to occur when they're actually noticing that cheetah from a certain distance, right? And it doesn't occur in other situations. And so it's an index. And here, if she were shivering only when she was cold, then it would be an index, but because she's using the shivering gesture in other situations where she's not cold, in order to modify something else, right, to provide an attribute to the freezing machine, to this machine, then she does seem to be using it as a kind of universal, right, as a predicate. Okay? So there's an indication here that she's, even before she's learning human language, that she's got some kind of capability of language that's beyond just that kind of indexical signs that we see with animals. Next, though, in the continuation of her account, she does then describe this sort of magical moment when she discovers human words. Right? So someone was drawing water, and my teacher placed my hand under the spout. As the cool stream gushed over one hand, she spelled into the other the word water, first slowly, then rapidly. I stood still, my whole attention fixed upon the motions of her fingers. Suddenly I felt a misty consciousness as of something forgotten, a thrill of returning thought. And somehow the mystery of language was revealed to me. I knew then that W-A-T-E-R meant the wonderful cool something that was flowing over my hand. That living word wakened my soul, gave it light, hope, joy, set it free. There were barriers still, it is true, but barriers that could in time be swept away. Right? So again, it's hard to kind of pick out a claim, but I think what she says at the end is sort of the claim that the experience of water reveals to her the function of language, right? That it's this revelatory experience. And the reason is because at this point, water has become this kind of universal. And she kind of indicates in these two phrases, I felt a misty consciousness of something forgotten, a thrill of returning thought, right? And so she's remembering something, and it's not clear exactly what she's remembering. So you could say, I mean, you recall that she had, as a baby, already used this word wawa, and so maybe she's remembering that, right? It could be that she's just remembering other instances of water and making the link between this water and that water, and the W-A-T-E-R sign as the linking sign that links the two. And this would be sort of an example of the way Herder describes the distinguishing mark as something that links the present experience to the recollection of a previous experience. Again, once you do that, you're using a sign not as an index anymore, purely, but rather as an arbitrary sign that links these two things and turns that sign into sort of the category marker that would link these two disparate experiences, right? So, and in fact, the experience of water itself, right, so that when she feels the water as something that's running over her hand, it's different than when she felt objects before. So another experience she had before this was that she was given a cup of water, right? And then they spilled water to her, and she didn't get it, right? She was just she confused it with cup, or she didn't really get that these are signs for, these are general signs for these things, right? And what may be making the difference here is that the continually running water is providing her with this experience of these many different states of water. So the water is continually running, so every instance of the water is still W-A-T-E-R. So in a sense, she's forced to recognize that the W-A-T-R is referring not to just one instance, but to all those instances of water. There's a continual flow, and all those instances of water can be categorized under that term W-A-T-E-R, and so forth. So therefore that term must be a kind of universal in which you're saying this is water repeatedly. This is water, and this is water, and this is water. without that running water, it's harder to get that consciousness of this is water, of linking up the present moment with that sign, right? So again, I mean, the trick is turning the sign into a predicate, right? That you're saying this present state is water, right? And instead of just sort of indicating water without being able to indicate that it's a predicate and therefore a kind of universal category, right? And so the experience of the running of the water helps her to do that because of these many different states of water, all of which can be designated with this single term, W-A-T-E-R, right? So she's indicating here then really this moment as this sort of revelation that changes her entire relationship to language. It's a question, though, whether in fact she's got a new relationship to language or not, right? And so this is what we're going to try and figure out.